Doc Pluralmanat's back again. Thank you, Doc, for the support. Was the Son of Man a late church invention, or are certain logii primary, and I think he's talking about Jesus here, primary to an early tradition of Jesus' prophetic self-awareness? If eugnostos or bin inash is a borrowed earlier figure, how did the idiom become conflated?
Now, you lost me a little bit on the end of that, but it's bar enash is what you get. It's in Aramaic, not Hebrew. In Hebrew, it would be Ben Adam. But now, you see, one of the striking things is that is an Aramaic idiom. You do not say Son of Man in Greek. Son of Man doesn't make much sense in Greek. But it's an idiom. It's just an expression that's perfectly acceptable in Aramaic or Hebrew. And that, I think, makes it very likely that the Son of Man sayings go back to an Aramaic-speaking environment. And that probably means pre-70. Now, Paul doesn't use it, but I think that's because Paul thinks in Greek. And I think Paul was probably familiar with the idea because he does have the idea of Christ coming in the air. So, no, I don't think it's late. I think it's early. Now, whether it goes back to Jesus himself or to his followers, that's a tougher question.
Thank you so much, Doc. Question I have for you, Dr. Collins, is the idea of cognitive dissonance playing a role here. And I kind of wonder what your take is, your personal take on, and by the way, none of this is concrete. I'm sure you're subject to change in any evidence that comes up. But what do you think happened? Do you think Jesus goes, I'm just painting a simple little airplane view picture here. Jesus goes down to Passover on this week. He's preaching the kingdom of God is coming. Maybe we need to identify what that is. Okay. And then he ends up getting smashed by the Romans, whether Jews told on him and didn't like him, or whether either way, he dies. Suffering servant idea, like slapping this onto him. Are they just looking at the scriptures to find a way to make sure he somehow checks off all the boxes because of cognitive dissonance? Tell me what you think happened.
Okay, I think I'm inclined to believe, now without any hard proof, that the Palm Sunday story happened, more or less. That when Jesus was coming into Jerusalem, some of his followers got excited and, he was playing it up, riding on a donkey, was acting out a prophecy. We have several stories about people who act out prophecies like that.
Theodus, Egyptian.
Yeah. Now, often, hard to know what he's thinking in that, but it was certainly, encouraging. He didn't necessarily mean I am coming as the Messiah, but it did mean, the Messiah is coming, the kingdom of God is coming. And it was probably left a little bit open-ended. He doesn't seem to have nailed down what he was doing in indisputable ways. Now, so the Romans see somebody coming in, causing a disturbance. People talking about King of the Jews. From the Roman point of view, that's insurrection. Crucify him. We can examine later. But in the meantime, and first thing is get rid of him, which they did. Now, whether any Roman authorities had a role, any Jewish authorities had a role in that, you see, it would make a certain amount of sense because the high priests were worried that if the Romans think we're staging a rebellion, they'll send in the troops. And what they did eventually in 70, they leveled the city, destroyed the temple. And so you can well see that some of the Jewish leaders would not have wanted this to happen. Now, again, this isn't proof that they did hand him over, but it's not implausible. And it doesn't, you can credit them with honorable motives in doing so. Now, after he is dead, I think you have got to accept that some people had visions and saw him. Now, this again is not unique.
Right.
Early in my teaching career, a couple came up to me after a lecture and told me how their son had been killed in an accident. And they really felt bad about it until one evening he came in and stood at the end of the bed and said, "It's all right." Now, I wasn't going to say to them, "Oh, that's an illusion." If somebody tells you that they saw their dead son, well, I think they probably did see him. It doesn't mean that if I had been there, I'd have seen him. And I don't think is that even claimed in the Gospels that everybody saw Jesus, but those who were really upset about his being crucified saw him. So I think that's the genesis of the idea that he's still, that he's still alive, that where did he go? Well, he must have been taken up to heaven. And once he's up in heaven, those clouds begin to look attractive.
That's kind of like what you just described is kind of like how John Dominic Crossan, when he debated a Muslim, he said if Muhammad existed in the 1st century and he was not claiming, or his followers about him after he died weren't claiming he was a son of God, he'd have had no game in town. So he was kind of making the point, like, it's like the zeitgeist in which this stuff comes from. There's not like a fixed line when you die. There's a continuation of the dead, typically, that people had honorary experiences or even honored them at their tomb, whatever it might be. So I could see the genesis here taking place. I really appreciate you answering that question. I was meaning to ask you one more about full preterism. I've mentioned this to you in the past. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Well, vaguely.
Well, it's the idea that, and I think I think cognitive dissonance works on us as well when we're fundamentalist believers to defend Jesus's words. They see, like you said earlier, let me just paint a picture for a second. You said earlier, well, we're not so sure Jesus actually said these words in Mark 13. If he did, he'd look like a radical fundamentalist. Well, when you're a fundamentalist who believes that every word in the New Testament's teaching and it says Jesus said, well, Jesus said, and therefore he had to be right. And so in order to make sure he's right and didn't fail, they say he did come on the clouds, but that's figurative language. And so it's really the second coming of Jesus is the destruction of Jerusalem. And then every single thing starts to become 70 AD doctrine. Would you say cognitive dissonance is working here as well to try and save face?
Yeah, I would. But, as you summarize it there, and I'm not making any accusations now about Tom Wright or anybody in particular as to what they actually think. But, it almost sounds anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
Because it almost sounds as if the destruction of Jerusalem is the fulfillment of eschatological hope.
Right. I've thought about this too.
Good.
No, it isn't. And I always thought, like, how in the world do we see that event and go, yes, the resurrection, God was faithful. You go, really?
Yeah. Somebody's kidding somebody there.